I know I mentioned it earlier when I was praying, but I just want to reiterate. You guys do know that Toys R Us is shutting down, right? Now, how many of you would say when you were younger you were a Toys R Us kid? Okay, I for sure was. I was a spoiled kid, all right? Like, I can remember as a kid, I was super ridiculously into professional wrestling as a kid, okay? Like, my earliest memory is not cartoons. It's Hulk Hogan body slamming Andre the Giant, all right? Those are my childhood memories. I used to fight my family members as if I was Hulk Hogan. I would rip shirts in half, or I would cut holes in them so that I could rip them. I would walk around, maybe too much information, I was a little kid, in my tighty-whities as if they were wrestling trunks, right? And I would do all the Hulk Hogan poses. Like, I loved it. But we would go to Toys R Us and we would get these wrestling toys and we would hunt them down because, man, they were a hot item at the time, and so you had to go looking for them. But man, as a kid, I love Toys R Us. So what I did when we found out they were closing is we decided to take my son and just see if we could find something, right? We had a gift card that I don't know when we were going to use it, but you got to use it, right? Because they're closing. And so we thought, well, we'll take him there. And can I tell you, walking into Toys R Us, I haven't been there very much as an adult. It was like going down memory lane, you know what I mean? Like, you see certain things and you go, oh man, I remember when that toy came out, and you're thinking like it's still popular because that's like the best toy in the world. You see board games and like all these memories float to your mind where you're like, oh, I remember playing that game and punching my brother in the face because of it, right? Like, you have all these memories. Because here's the thing about memories, whether it's Toys R Us or something else, you and I, we all know this, right? Our pasts are powerful. Our past, your past, my past, our past together, they are powerful, powerful things. Because here's what happens. You could smell something and in an instant be back in your grandma's kitchen, right? You could hear a song, and in that moment, you can remember what car you were driving, who you were with, what you were doing. Some of you can remember what you were wearing, right? You know that just off of a sound. Some of you see a place. Like, I grew up in Cincinnati, and so every time I go to Cincinnati, I drive past Kings Island. And I remember as a kid, right, doing everything I could to sneak my friends into Kings Island. We would do that thing where you would get the stamp on your hand, because I had a season pass, and we would take some girls, and you'd go out and get your hand a little wet, try to rub it on their hand so the stamp would show up. And I remember getting busted quite a few times, but that's okay, right? Because I'm a rebel, so we just keep trying because that's what the ladies wanted in high school, so you have to do that. I'd drive my really old car and we'd go. So here's the deal, right? Our memories, our pasts are incredibly powerful things, which is kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because, like, hey, all cards on the table. I've had a really good life, okay? It's had trouble. There's definitely been some pain and some hurt, but overall, man, I grew up with two parents in the same home that loved each other. I grew up with a brother that even though we fought, man, we're close and we like each other still to this day. I went to excellent schools. I had great friends. I enjoyed my time playing sports. My past is great, but not all of us have that same experience, right? So for some of you, you hear something and you don't go down a positive memory lane, but you start getting anxious. Because that sound, that word, that tone of voice is attached to something dark. It's attached to some pain for you, right? So there's nothing in this life like our past, because our past can bring us back anytime it wants, right? Our past can absolutely take a good day and make it a horrible day. For some of us, it can take a horrible day and make it into a great day. What we know is this: regardless of how you grew up, regardless of your experience in life, man, our pasts are powerful. And here's the difficult thing about your past, though, good or bad, is you can't change your past. You can't change it. As far as I know, nobody's invented a time machine. And even if they did, I've watched enough cartoons and comic book things to know that if you change one thing in the past, right, there's a ripple effect or a flashpoint for my DC comic friends, right? Right? Things happen. You can't change the past. Like, you can't change the past. You can't change what's already happened. But here's what we do know, is even though you can't change the past, here's what I believe: Jesus can change your future. You can't change your past, but Jesus can change your future. I can say it one more time, because if you're taking notes, this is a good one. There's no cheats on your chair, right? You can't change your past, but Jesus can absolutely 100,000% change your future. Jesus can take anybody's life and drastically change it. Who you are today is not who you have to be tomorrow, and the path you're on today does not have to be the path you're on 5 years from now. Jesus can change anything in an instant because you cannot change your past, but Jesus can absolutely change your future. So to show you that, just so we can talk a little bit more about it, once again, we're in John chapter 21, and so I just want to give you just a little bit of insight into where we are, because John chapter 21, this is a part in the Gospel of John, if you notice, it's unlike most of the other Gospels. Most of the other Gospels, Jesus dies on the cross, is resurrected, and then boom, we're done. But John has the 21st chapter. And the 21st chapter is almost like at the end of the movie, right? So I like action movies. They do not have to have a good script to be good. I just like watching stuff blow up, okay? But at the end of this movie, after everything blows up, there's always like maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, where they're just kind of like tying up some loose ends, maybe not, but they're trying to do something to kind of just like wrap it all up, bring it all together. This is what John chapter 21 is. Okay, it's this part in the Gospel of John that's just tying up some loose ends. And here's the big loose end that's getting tied up, is what does Jesus do with a man named Peter? Okay, because Peter was one of Jesus' 12 disciples, but Peter, more than any other disciple, was Jesus' like right-hand man. Okay, we know that Jesus spent more time with Peter than with any other disciple, and yet, right before Jesus dies, he's sitting at dinner with all of his disciples, and he looks at them, he explains what's about to happen. He's about to die, that it's for our benefit, but he will not stay dead, and Peter is defiant and says, I won't let that happen. Because Peter's passionate and he's stubborn, and I like that because I'm passionate and I'm incredibly stubborn. If you don't believe me, ask my wife. But so Peter is passionate, Peter is stubborn, and Jesus looks at him and says, actually, Peter, you're going to abandon me. Because Peter, you're going to deny me not once, not twice, but 3 times tonight. Peter, once again, no way, Lord, it will not happen. But if you fast forward, you read the Gospels, here's what you see. Peter denies Jesus the first time. That wasn't enough. He denies him the second time. That wasn't enough. Jesus knows what he's talking about, right? Jesus says something, you better listen, because he knows. Denies him 3 times. So here's what you got to think about, okay? Because we kind of take people in the Bible and assume that they're heroic and they don't deal with insecurity the way that we deal with insecurity, or regret the way that we deal with regret. If you're Peter, you are excited that Jesus is alive after 3 days, but aren't you a little nervous about that first conversation one-on-one with Jesus, right? Because if we're being honest, you kind of expect the I told you so, right? Like you expect like, Peter, what did I say was going to happen, right? Bro, 3 times, told you it was going to happen. Peter's got to be nervous, right? This is why for some of us, when we do something wrong, we don't even like to answer our phones, right? You don't want to return the text message. You don't want to even check your email because you're nervous. What you're going to see, some of you don't check your bank account because you're thinking, Friday night was a little crazy, right? The 4th meal at Taco Bell maybe didn't need to happen with my bank account, but you made it happen, right? You get nervous. So this is what happens. Peter has to be feeling insecure. There's a good chance he's feeling nervous. And so Peter, here's what we see in John chapter 21. We're going to start in verse 3. It says, Peter said this. He said, I'm going fishing. Now here's all that really means. Peter, before Jesus chose him, Peter was a fisherman by trade, really good at it, had a business with it. So he just decides, man, I'm going to go back to doing what I've always done. I'm going fishing. And then the other people, they say, well, we'll come too. So they went out in the boat, but they caught nothing all night. This is a group of skilled fishermen. They fish at night because it's not too hot. Fish will bite, but nobody is biting a thing. It says this in verse number 4. Notice this is like the change in the conversation. It says, at dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was, right? We don't know if that's because the way the sun was coming in, if the sun was behind him, and you know how it is when the sun first comes up, especially if you've been to the beach, it can be blinding at times. We don't know if it was just maybe so far away and they didn't have glasses the way that we have glasses today. For whatever reason, they could not see that it was actually Jesus. So Jesus in verse 5 does this. It says he called out, fellows, right? Another way here of saying fellows when he says that could also be translated children. He says, children, have you caught any fish? Now, if I'm the fisherman and I'm out in the middle of the night and some dude from the shore goes, hey, little guys, have you caught any fish? I'm saying, mind your own business, right? He says, hey, have you caught any fish? I might tell him I've caught one, and you might guess what finger I'd tell him that with, right? And I wouldn't do that. That's not me. That's somebody else more sinful than me. I wouldn't do that. But here's the deal, right? He just asks, he says, hey, little guys, have you caught any fish? And I respect them because they are so much more polite than I am. They just say no. Right? No, we haven't caught anything. So then in verse 6 it says this, that then he said, throw out your net on the right-hand side of the boat and you'll get some. Once again, hey, little guys, have you caught any fish? No. Hey, try the other side. Oh, you mean press the button? Is that what, like that button? Okay, wouldn't think of that, right? Turn on the light. Yeah, I get it. Go to the other side. Once again, mind your own business, but they're better than me, okay? This is why they got to follow Jesus and I didn't get to walk with him, right? They get to do their own thing. They decide, oh, okay. So they did. Verse 6, right? So they did. And they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Now here's the thing. This for them was like deja vu. Okay? Because this isn't the first time that they've had a miraculous, sudden catch of fish. This is like me walking down the aisle at Toys R Us. This is memory lane coming back to get them. And here's what it says in verse 7. It says, then the disciple Jesus loved. Okay, I'm going to give you, if you didn't know this, some of you guys know, some of you don't. The disciple Jesus loved, when you read that in the book of John, guess who wrote that? Guy named John, okay? So he writes the Gospel of John. Hey, that's Peter. That's this guy. That's Thomas knows the twin. Oh, and by the way, there's also the disciple Jesus loved. That's me, right? Like, that's what he does. So it says this. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. He notices, recognizes in that moment, for whatever reason, maybe it's the miraculous catch of fish, and it's the deja vu getting him, maybe the sun's come up, whatever reason, he says, Peter, it's the Lord, it's Jesus. This is who's talking to us. Aren't you glad you didn't tell him you only caught one fish, right? Like, this is Jesus, because I'm pretty sure if you flip Jesus the bird, that does not end well for you, okay? But he says, it's the Lord. So when Simon Peter heard this, and heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he had stripped for work, jumped into the water, and headed to shore. So Peter doesn't wait for the boat to row back in. He just decides, I'm going to put on whatever clothes I got to put on real quick, and I am swimming and running. There's about 100 yards to shore as fast as I can to get back to Jesus. And you would think that immediately there would be like a conversation, right? But there's not. Instead, Jesus invites Peter and all the disciples to eat breakfast. He's already got breakfast ready there for them. It's already sitting there ready to go. So they're eating breakfast. And now, like, have you ever been waiting for an awkward conversation before? Like, you're in the same room with the person and you're waiting for them to say something. It's like, I'm going to let them talk first, but it takes forever, right? This is the breakfast that Peter's having. He's sitting at breakfast with Jesus, with some of the disciples, and Jesus hasn't said anything. Peter hasn't said anything, but there's tension there, okay? So all of a sudden, that's where we get into, we're going to skip ahead just for the sake of time, verse 15. Breakfast is over, and it says this, that after breakfast, Jesus asks Simon Peter, he says, didn't I tell you so? No, he doesn't say that, right? It says, after breakfast, Jesus asks Simon Peter, he says, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than these people around you? Do you love me? Yes, Lord, Peter replied, you know I love you. And then he says, well, then feed my lambs. Now here's what he's saying. I want you to take care of people who are beginning to believe in me. Right? It's your job to help them grow spiritually. Feed my lambs. And then verse 16, Jesus repeated the question, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, Peter said, you know I love you. Then take care of my sheep, Jesus said. In other words, hey, not just my lambs, not just the little ones, but even those who have been following me for a little bit, I want you to take care of them. You grow them. You feed them. You take care of them. And then verse 17, a third time, Jesus asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Now, I totally associate with Peter here, right? Because Jesus has now asked this question a third time, and it says Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time, and he said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. So he's affirmed his love now. He denied him 3 times. Now he's affirmed his love 3 times. Jesus said, then feed my sheep, lead my people, show them what they need to do. So they're kind of back to square one, if that makes sense, right? Jesus has wiped away the debt, but then Jesus reassures him in a way that might not sound reassuring to you and to me. Here's what he says in verse 18. Jesus speaking to Peter says, I tell you the truth, when you were young, you were able to do as you liked. You dressed yourself and went wherever you wanted to go. That's kind of his life before Jesus. But now, when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and others will dress you and take you where you don't want to go. Here's what Jesus says. Here in the future, you're going to stretch out your hands, and Peter, you're going to die the death that I died. Jesus' way of reassuring Peter is to say, Peter, when you were young, you could do what you wanted to do. That's your past. We've just wiped the slate clean here in the present, but in the future, you're going to die the death that I died. Now, most of us aren't signing up for that, right? Like most of us aren't saying, hey, can you tell me something to boost my confidence? Sure, you're going to be crucified. It doesn't really work for us, right? Here's why it was so encouraging for Peter, though. If for your whole life, you've kind of thought that you don't have what it takes to stick with it, if that's the narrative that's been running through in your mind, and when the person who loved you the most, you failed in the biggest way when he needed you the most, that narrative just gets louder and louder, right? You're a screw up. You'll never figure it out. You'll never fix it. You'll never get better. You're always going to make the same mistake. You don't have what it takes. Here's what Jesus is telling him when he says, you're going to stretch out your hands. Jesus is saying, Peter, you've got what it takes to stick with this. Jesus, in that moment, in the present for Peter, is not just trying to rewrite his past and reframe the way he sees it. He's trying to help him see the future differently. See, here's the thing for us. We all have a life before Jesus Christ. We all have a past. It can be messy. It can be clean. I don't know what your past is. I don't know your whole story. But here's what I know. You have a past. And here in the present, Jesus can absolutely change everything for you. You can't change your past, but in the present, right now, Jesus can absolutely change your future. He can do for you what he did for Peter. He can begin to write your story brand new. He can do that. So here's the question then. If he can do that, if that's what I want him to do, if that's really the desire of my heart, well then what do I need to do? You got to take the leap. Peter, remember this, right? Verse 7, we read it earlier. He recognizes the Lord. First thing he does, he just jumps right back in the water. He does what he needs to do to get to Jesus as fast as he can. He takes that leap. For us, I'm not asking you to leap in the water. Here's what I'm asking you to do. Take a leap of faith. Take a leap of faith. What's faith? It's confidence in what I can't see. You and I, we can't see Jesus face to face. Short of maybe a miraculous intervention here, we're not going to see Jesus face to face. But here's the deal. Jesus tells us that if we put our trust in him, he can change absolutely everything. We in the present have to take a leap of faith if we want to experience a different future, a better future. So here's what he tells us. 1 John 2:9. I'm going to read this to you. If we're going to take the leap, here's what it looks like. 1 John 2:9. It says if we confess our sins to him, if we'll take what we've done wrong, right? Because here's the deal. As hard as it is maybe for us to fully understand, all of us have done things that are offensive to God. All right? He's not asking us to walk around defeated and like a victim. Here's what he's saying. Hey, if you'll take those things that are offensive to me and you'll just admit that, hey, God, I've done things that have offended you. If we will confess our sins. And he continues. He says, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all the wickedness in our lives. So here's what happens. You can't change your past, but Jesus can change your future. Here's how Jesus changes your future. You admit to him, Jesus, I've made some mistakes, and he wipes the debt clean. You are given a brand new opportunity right here in this moment. Something happens in a room in Akron, Ohio that has a ripple effect through eternity. But it starts with us taking the leap. So I'm gonna